Every schoolbook tells you Athens rose on ideas: democracy, philosophy, drama. Nice story. But ideas don't feed a city of 250,000 mouths. Bread does. And bread in Athens didn't grow in Attica's thin soils. It sailed in, across hundreds of miles, through a pair of narrow throats, where one hostile fleet could squeeze a democracy until it turned purple. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The world's most celebrated city-state wasn't built on marble and ideals. It was built on grain lanes. And when those lanes snapped, so did Athens. This is Empire Ledger, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is as simple as it looks. Athens did not merely buy grain. It engineered a system: walls, fleets, alliances, laws, whose single quiet purpose was keeping ships full of wheat moving into the Piraeus. That system made Athens rich, loud, and free. The same system made it fragile. Because the moment the sea stopped cooperating, or enemies learned which levers to pull, the Athenian miracle looked less like philosophy and more like a pantry with a padlock. To see how a city of ideas became captive to logistics, we need to go back to the beginning, when bread became strategy. Start with the ground. Attica sits on rock and romance, not loam. The land gives olives for oil, vines for wine, goats for meat and milk, plenty for a symposium, not enough for the daily bread of a swelling urban population. As the 5th century before our era opened, Athens had grown past what its barley fields could support. That created a permanent arithmetic problem. If citizens are to vote, row, build temples, and argue about justice, they must eat. If they cannot grow enough at home, they must import. The closest granaries lie across the water. First came the short runs from Euboea, whose plains could send barley across the strait by the boatload. Thessaly's horse country added more. Then, as mouths multiplied and confidence in the navy rose, the shopping list stretched farther. Egypt's Nile harvests, Sicily's golden interior, and, most decisive, the Black Sea Basin, the Euxine, where river-fed soils yielded wheat so abundantly that one successful season could flood the Aegean with ships riding low under sacks. All of that grain needed a throat to pass through and a stomach to receive it. Athens built both. Down on its coast it carved the port of Piraeus, a commercial engine designed to swallow cargo and spit out prosperity. To connect port and city, it drew stone umbilicals across the landscape, the long walls running miles from Athens to Piraeus. Armies could trample Attica. It would not matter. Behind those walls, merchants could unload, millers could grind, and bakers could bake. That is the first reveal. What we call the Athenian naval empire was not just about glory and painted prows. It was a maritime supply chain with a constitution. When you depend on grain, you do not beg for it, you guarantee it. The Delian League began as a defensive coalition against Persia. It became, through the force of silver and the habit of victory, an Athenian-managed network of ports, garrisons, friendly magistrates, and tribute collectors. Tribute silver bought triremes. Triremes protected merchants. Merchants kept bread cheap enough to keep citizens content and rowers strong. Circular? Yes, by design. Athens ran its market with a seriousness modern states reserve for strategic oil and rare earths. Market officials monitored weights and measures, punished hoarding and fraud, and policed prices. The city incentivized importers and discouraged exporters, because wheat moving out was a political risk, while wheat moving in was a civic good. It used bottomry loans, maritime finance that died with the ship if the ship died, to spread risk across the community and keep hulls sailing even when seas turned mean. And those walls, those expensive, defiant walls, didn't just protect people, they protected prices. Within the stone corridor, buyers and sellers could transact under the city's shield, while the countryside smoked under Spartan torches. All of that was the architecture. The beating heart lay far to the northeast, where the Black Sea squeezed itself through two narrow passages, the Bosporus and the Hellespont, before widening into the Aegean like a funnel emptying into a bowl. Control those channels and you could feed a city, lose them and you could starve it without firing a single arrow into Attica. Athens learned that geography is a clause in every contract. It stationed allies and warships along the northern Aegean, leaned on the cities of the Thracian coast, fortified the Chersonese, today's Gallipoli, and kept one eye perpetually on Byzantium, the gatekeeper of the straits. Pirates had to be suppressed. Disloyal polis had to be chastised. The philosophers might argue about justice and virtue on the Nix, but convoys needed escorts and friendly customs houses. Own the bottleneck or become the bottle. Turning food into leverage is an old art. Athens didn't invent it, but it practiced it with finesse and sometimes cruelty. When it clashed with small rivals, they could close markets and let scarcity do the arguing. The famous Megarian decree barred Megara from Athenian-controlled harbors, an embargo dressed up in legal language and religious outrage. To pro-Athenian eyes, it was policy. To Sparta, it was provocation. War followed. Spartan armies marched into Attica year after year, burning what they could not carry, daring Athens to come out and fight on land. Athens refused. It huddled behind its long walls, secure in the knowledge that walls and ships together could outlast any hoplite campaign. The land might burn, the sea would feed them. It was a sound plan, militarily. Economically and biologically, it became a trap. Refugees from the countryside poured into the cramped safety of the city, crowding turned houses into barracks and streets into latrines. Disease does not care about strategy. In the second year of the war, the plague came and scythed through a packed urban population, including, most disastrously, Pericles himself. Bread prices climbed, tempers frayed. The city learned that while walls and fleets can keep an enemy out, they cannot keep a microbe from spreading or a market from tightening. And yet the lifeline held. Convoys sailed, merchants returned. Tribute kept the oarsmen paid, the oarsmen kept the routes open. The Athenian machine still worked expensively, precariously, defiantly. The question was simple. How long can you run an engine designed for peacetime pressure at wartime stress before the Bering Seas? Athens answered with hubris. If you depend on grain, one way to secure it is to conquer a granary. Across the sea lay Sicily, whose interior plains could feed fleets. Syracuse, dominant there, stood like a full pantry behind a locked door. The Athenian assembly voted to bring back grain and glory in one stroke. The Sicilian expedition would be a masterstroke. Knock out a rival, add a granary, and tilt the war back to Athens. It looked perfect on a map. On the water and on the ground, it became a catastrophe. Distance diluted coordination. Local politics tangled the plan. Syracuse proved resilient, Spartan advisors clever, and Athenian command fatally divided. The expedition ended in wreckage, hulks burned in a harbor, soldiers killed, enslaved, or lost in the wilderness. And back home the mouths remained. Only now there were fewer ships and fewer experienced crews to guard the straits and shepherd the lifeline. That is the imperial mirage, mistaking access for ownership. You don't own the grain you cannot keep flowing. After Sicily, Spartan strategy changed. Why keep poking Athens where it is strongest? Why deliver your own hoplites to die against stone and sea? Instead, starve the machine of what it needs to run, silver for pay and ships for escort. Sparta built a permanent base at Decelea, inside Attica itself, a dagger planted in Athenian logistics. Decilia strangled the movement of goods overland and, more critically, cut into the revenue of the Laurian silver mines, the mint that paid for hulls and oars. At the same time, Sparta found a new patron, Persian satraps, happy to see the Greeks bleed one another, paid for Spartan timber and Spartan sails. With Persian money, Sparta built the navy it had lacked and found in Lysander an admiral whose genius wasn't just tactical but diplomatic. Ports flipped allegiance along the northern Aegean. Cities that secured Athenian access to the Hellespont now opened their harbors to Sparta, or at least closed them to Athens. The funnel narrowed. Then came Aegospotamy. The details read like inevitable tragedy, but the logic is simple. Athenian ships, exhausted by years of war and short on supplies, anchored in a poor position on the Hellespont's shore. Lysander watched, waited, found his moment, and struck with speed. The Athenian fleet, what remained of the democratic heartbeat, was annihilated almost without a fight. No fleet means no escorts. No escorts means no grain. No grain means no democracy. Athens did not fall because Spartan soldiers stormed the long walls. Athens fell because the Piraeus grew quiet, because the wind filled the wrong sails, because wheat went somewhere else. A city fed by the sea died by the sea. When the surrender came in 404, it came on empty stomachs. The empire that rose on wheat lanes collapsed when those lanes closed. The lesson landed hard, but not cleanly. Athens did not disappear. It recalibrated. It strengthened the offices that watched bread. It kept emergency grain funds, public stockpiles, and credit, ready to smooth shocks. It courted Euboea again, made overtures to Byzantium, and assembled a second maritime league that pretended to be an alliance, while asking politely now for the same old favors. Keep the routes open, the convoys safe, the prices tolerable. Laws multiplied around grain, decrees against exporting local staples, penalties for hoarding, incentives for merchants who risked the long run from the Black Sea. When force failed, lawfare filled the gap. But there is, Diao, only so much regulation can do when the hinge of your diet lies on a map you do not fully control. You can punish a merchant. You cannot legislate a gale or a hostile admiral out of existence. Pull back, and the picture is painfully elegant. We love to treat Athens as the triumph of mind over might, of argument over force. But thought does not levitate bread. The Athenian miracle stacked abstractions on supply lines. Democracy produced rowers. Rowers produced a fleet. The fleet secured grain. Grain fed citizens. Citizens empowered democracy. That loop is a marvel when each link holds, and a death sentence when one snaps. Wealth and freedom in this telling are logistics. The Parthenon's marble columns stand on a foundation of wheat sacks and insurance contracts. The trials, the plays, the philosophy lectures, these are the flowers at the end of a long stalk whose roots drink from foreign fields. The price of scale is fragility. The bigger a city grows, the farther its bread must travel. The farther it travels, the fewer places you can afford to lose. Athens climbed high. Its shadow stretched over the Hellespont. It could defeat armies, out-argue ambassadors, and outbuild rivals, but it could not eat without asking permission of a pair of straits it did not own. When Sicily tempted it to overreach, when Decelea bled its silver, when Persian funding built a Spartan navy, the democracy learned a lesson that never truly leaves the sea. You can bully a neighbor, you can sue a merchant, you can vote a general into exile, but you cannot invent a harvest where there wasn't one, and you cannot reroute a bottleneck with rhetoric. Athens wasn't simply defeated, it was interrupted. Strip away the cast of characters and you can hear the quiet mathematics of dependence. A convoy leaves a Black Sea port loaded with wheat. It passes a friendly city, pays a duty, and joins an escorted column. A storm delayed it for 3 days. A squadron of hostile ships loiters near the straits. The escort hesitates. Prices in Athens tick upward day by day. First an irritation, then a hardship, then a crisis. The assembly debates war aims while bakers ration flour. Somewhere a farmer in Thrace plants more seed. Somewhere an admiral compromises a fresh alliance and tells himself that the sea belongs to those who dare. But the sea belongs finally to geography, to wind, to narrow channels with other people's walls. A city of ideals learns that ideals ride on hulls. There is a temptation here to moralize, to say Athens deserved its fall because it used its league like a bank account and its allies like branches. History isn't so sentimental. Systems protect themselves. Athens built the only system it could see. Pay for ships with tribute, guard the grain, police the market, and keep the people fed enough to keep the machine running. It worked brilliantly until it didn't. That's not a conspiracy. That's policy colliding with reality. The farmers of Attica did their part. The clerks counted coins, the rowers pulled, the admirals gambled. And the whole time, somewhere out beyond the horizon, the Black Sea winds and the straits, currents, and the immoral arithmetic of choke points decided whether democracy would eat today. If that sounds ancient and remote, swap wheat for oil, semiconductors, or fertilizer. Swap triremes for tankers, sanctions, and maritime insurance. Cities still live at the mercy of straits they claim to manage. The names are different. The logic hasn't aged a day. No villains are required, only geography, incentives, and the one rival who remembers to station a fleet where the map narrows. Sometimes a state starves because its army is weak. More often, it starves because its shipping lanes are weakly imagined, because a politician mistook a vote for a convoy, because the people believed their walls protected everything that mattered. So what made Athens? Grain did. Grain and the laws and ships that carried it. What unmade Athens? The same grain when it ceased to appear, when the rhythm of arrivals from the Black Sea broke, when the long walls became the corridor of a besieged pantry instead of the artery of a confident metropolis. Athens' greatness was not an accident. It was a supply chain with a navy attached and a constitution on top. The city that taught the world to argue forgot that debates don't move cargo. Sicily tempted it to overreach. Decelea pinned its arteries, the Hellespont closed. And the lesson surfaced with cruel clarity. The higher a civilization climbs on imported staples, the longer its shadow stretches over a narrow sea. Every empire swears its defenses are strong. Every government insists its systems will last forever. And every time, history proves them wrong. Usually not with the crash of walls, but with the silence of a harbor. Athens rose because grain rode in on the wind to Piraeus, regular as a heartbeat. It fell when the wind turned and the escorts did not come. The grain trade made Athens, rich, democratic, audacious. The grain trade unmade it, slowly, then all at once, the day the sails stopped appearing on the horizon. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.